Hello again. Well, I go missing in action for 2 months and then you get 3 videos up within 24 hours. Well, there you go. I should just explain, I've been away a lot for the last 8 weeks or so. I had very poor Wi-Fi access. I have 20 gigabytes plus another 10, making 30 on my phone plan, and because the Wi-Fi was so bad I ended up using most of the data for what I needed to be doing, and then it left me next to nothing to watch your videos on YouTube. So in the next week or so I am going to be catching up on all your videos, commenting and so on. I did manage to fire off a few comments on some videos whenever I managed to get Wi-Fi, but it was an extremely poor service. So anyhow, quick update. Was not actually quick, it's nearly half an hour long. So those of you who said, oh, I don't mind watching a worm video for 30 minutes, well, you're going to be tested now. This is the mother bin, and I have to be honest from the offset, the bins are not in good condition, and that's because they've been pretty much neglected for the last 8 weeks. We're now, this was videoed on Sunday evening, just as the light was going. You'll probably see this tomorrow, which is Tuesday. So this is technically the end of week 45 for the mother bin. And before anybody goes accusing me of being a negligent worm parent, I did actually leave somebody in charge of these bins. However, if you're not a horse, or if you don't look like a horse, or if you don't behave like a horse, or if you don't live in a stable, the person who's deputised as head of small worm bin feeding isn't really interested in you. So there you go. I shall not name any names. But this is the mother bin. It looks reasonable on the camera, I think, but it's actually in worse condition than what it looks. You probably picked up there. It hasn't really grown in the last 2 months. In fact, if anything, the number seems to have declined a little. And it doesn't come out well on this camera because the light was starting to go and the flash was on the camera, so it's not a great picture, but it's incredibly dry. So I'm just going to add a little bit of melon. I'm not adding moisture to the bin. There'll be plenty of moisture from the melon. So that should give the mother bin a bit of a kickstart. And we'll catch up with it at the end of next week because I'm home all week. Well, I'm home for the next 10 days or so. So I should be able to do an update at the end of next week, which will be the end of week 46. And we'll just see how the mother bin has recovered. So that's the mother bin. Next up is one of the daughter bins. Now, you'll have heard me say, and you'll have heard others say, and you'll have come across it in the literature, not to use laminated cardboard in worm bins. I used a laminated piece of cardboard as a cover, and you can see what's happened here. The worms have actually eaten all the cardboard underneath and left the plastic laminate on top. Now this bin looks very similar to the mother bin, and again it's not coming out very well on this picture, but it's not dry, but it's not as moist as I like the bins to be. In fact, in parts of this bin, it's almost dusty. The worms themselves look quite healthy. But to me, looking at the bin now, there seems to be a drop in the population. The numbers aren't what I would have expected them to be 2 months on from the last update. But then when you remember that the person delegated to look after the bins didn't actually do so, it isn't surprising. So these bins are going to get some cooking apple peel. I think there's a bit of potato peel mixed in there as well, and what little bits of fruit I have. You'll have heard me say before as well that I collect food scraps from a couple of local care homes, and that's what I use to feed the various compost bins, including the worm bins. But of course I haven't been here, so there's been no scraps collected, so it's very thin, slim pickings, as they say. But this will keep them going, and I'll have the food store, scrap store, stocked up by the end of this week, so they'll be all right. So that's the first daughter bin taken care of. Well, it's good to see there's any worms left at all in the bins, to be honest. And it does go to show that if you need to go away, as long as the bins are in pretty good condition before you go, they will survive, even if they've been neglected. This is the second daughter bin. And again, the worms that are in the bin are not in too bad condition, really. But this bin, like the other two, is it's a bit drier than I would like it to be. And again, excuse me, it's not coming out very well on this video, but more of the worms are at the bottom, where it was a bit more moist. And you can almost tell by looking at the palms of my hands there that it's leaving almost no residue. I could just pat my hands and get rid of... you wouldn't know my hands had been in vermicompost, that's how dry it is. So I'm just fluffing up the bin there. I mean, there's a little bunch of worms have obviously found something nice down in that corner. But I'm just going to fluff up the bedding to get plenty of air through to it, and then just put whatever little bit of scraps I have. I think these bins will deserve an extra special treat at the end of this week. Now you'll see the carrot peel there. That is going to be there for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's just gone in raw. And if you feed your small bin like this, carrot, potato peel, whatever, it's a much better idea to freeze and then thaw before adding to the bin, or to actually blend it, because going in like that, any sort of root crop will just sit in the bin forever. In fact, next week I'll break that bit of carrot, and I bet you'll hear it snap. It'll be almost as fresh as when it was cut. But like I said, this is just a little bit of a rush because I just need to get something into the bins. You'll have to excuse me, I'm drinking tea while talking to you, because it's 4:35 AM when I'm doing this audio. But I want to get it done and get this uploaded onto YouTube before the day starts properly, because heaven knows what will happen today, and I don't want to delay this update any longer. So that's the second daughter bin sorted. Now here's one of the granddaughter bins. And strangely enough, the two granddaughter bins were actually in much better condition than the mother bin or the two daughter bins. And they're stored in the same place. The only thing I can think it is that the granddaughter bins were at the bottom of the pile, bottom of the stack of worm bins under cover, so it may be that they didn't dry out. I understand there hasn't been very much rain, and in fact the weather's been very good while I've been away for most of the 2 months, so it may be being at the bottom of the pile is a good place to be if you're a worm bin. Now, you'll have heard me say that it was slim pickings this week. However, I do have in my possession a 1.5 kilo bag of, I think it was corn flour. As luck would have it, I was in a shop when a bag was dropped off one of the shelves and split on the floor, and the guy was sweeping it up in a pan, and it was destined for the dustbin, so I told him I would have it. And that's now been fed to the worm bin. All I've done with it is taken a couple of handfuls of the corn flour and mixed into that a handful of ground up eggshells. Now, if you do throw a feed like this into your worm bin, if you're using up out of date flour or whatever, it's absolutely fine for the worms. They love it, but it needs to be dampened down. And normally what I would do is, if I was going to feed a lot of flour to the bins, I would leave them out in the open with no cover on to drive the worms down, so I know the flour isn't getting onto their skin. And that's because they breathe through their skin, and of course the flour will absorb moisture, so it just won't be very... I mean, they're not going to die, they'll just burrow down, and the moisture in the soil, in the vermicompost and on the worms, it will remove the flour from them, but they won't like it. So it's better to spread this on the top when the worms have been driven down from the surface. So having wet that down, I'm just going to mix it into the bin now. My tea's getting cold. Right, this is quite a long video, but it's a bit of a mega update. So I have the mother bin, the two daughter bins, the two granddaughter bins, and I also thought we'd have a quick look at the two little children's worm bins. This is the Chinese takeaway container worm bin. And the guys in here seem to be doing very well. That will be because there isn't, the little bit of food that was in there is actually plenty for the number of worms that are in there. The worm population is controlled by the amount of food available and the amount of space available. So it would never be the case that in a tiny little container like this I would get 700-800 worms all vying for food and space. They will regulate themselves accordingly, so I reckon about 30 worms or so is the most that's ever going to be in this bin, in this container I should say, and that's roughly what's in there, with quite a few cocoons. It's good to see. So that little container doesn't look any the worse for wear for being neglected for 2 months. Now this is the first prototype I made using a yogurt tub, which my granddaughter then just wouldn't give back to me, if you remember. But this one is in great nick altogether. The worms are absolutely thriving in here. And it's really starting to take shape, because what I wanted my granddaughter to see was cardboard and food scraps getting turned into soil by the worms. And then once we produce enough soil in this pot, we're going to fill up a little 4-inch flower pot with the soil that we make using the worms and our food scraps, and we're going to plant some radish in it. Radish is a great little plant for very young children, and you'll be able to see that grow in no time at all. So it's a great way of communicating the idea of composting, the cycle of life, worms, nutrients, growing your own food. It's all in there in a very simple, child-friendly way. So that little bucket looks in great condition, and that may be because I put the top of a melon at the bottom of that bin. That was the melon skin you saw there, before I left, and again because of the number of worms, that was probably just plenty of food. And that bucket actually feels quite wet, and that again may be just the melon, but that melon was sufficient for the number of worms that's in there. So yeah, very happy with that little bucket. It's doing great. We'll soon have enough soil now to fill our little 4-inch pot. Here we have the second granddaughter bin, and like the first one, this is actually in better condition than the mother or two daughter bins. And again, I think it's just because of the way it was stacked at the bottom of the other bins, it didn't dry out as much. The worm population in here looks pretty good. And I also think that the bedding helped. There's quite a bit of cardboard in there, even though it's a bit on the dry side now. So I'm just going to do the same as I did with the other bins I had no food scraps for. I'm just going to add some of the corn flour with the mixed in ground up eggshells and dampen that down, and that will have to do them until the end of the week, when we'll come back and have a look and see how they're doing. So I'm just mixing that in now. You can get a worm chow feed, which is made up of different flours. I think it's got oatmeal and cornmeal and whatever else, and it's supposed to be a worm food and a worm fattening food. I've never tried it or used it. It's not something I would buy either. But definitely any out-of-date flowers, anything like that, you can safely add to the worm bin. Again, it's like everything else with worm bins, as long as it's done in moderation, the worms will be absolutely fine with it. Well, they'll have to be, there's nothing else to give them. Poor little things. So that's well wetted down now. Next, I thought, because we're doing a bit of a mega update, we'd have a look at the cardboard only worm bin. That was the bin, if you remember, I did a cardboard only experiment with, and then I fished out about 500 worms and estimated there was about another 100 or so left. Now you'll see a little piece of melon in here. That's what I used to fish out all the babies. I'm a firm believer in letting the worms do all the work. So all I did was, you'll recall I mentioned that there was probably quite a few, well, there was loads of cocoons actually, not quite a few, there was loads. So as they've been hatching, of course the babies go and get attracted to the very sweet, sugary bacteria which are on the melon, and it's just a simple case of lifting out the melon, scraping off a layer of the flesh, which will have lots and lots of baby worms on it, adding them to wherever they're going, into whichever worm bin, and put the melon back. So I fished out at least another 100 worms, so that would have meant that there was more than 600 in this bin. So if you think, when I did the experiment, we started with 30 worms, and 20 or so weeks later we had 600. So that was a pretty good reproduction rate. So, and then I said what I'd do is I'm just going to leave this worm bin. So there are some worms in here. It's cardboard only except for the melon, and I just want to see what happens with it. It's already changed colour. Again, I'm sorry, but it doesn't come out very well on this camera phone, but it's actually starting to look like soil. So there's doubtless an awful lot of cocoons still in here that haven't hatched. There are some juvenile worms that have hatched, and I'm just going to leave. I'm not taking any more worms out of this bin now. I'm just going to leave it be, and we'll see what they do. Somebody put a question up, and I couldn't find it then when I went to go look through the comments. I saw it at a point when I didn't really have a great connection, and I thought I'll reply later when I'm home. But I can't find the comment now, and I can't remember who it was, but they mentioned about keeping the bin wet. It's really just a case of keeping an eye on the bin. So literally all I'm doing with this bin now is just going to make sure that it stays moist for whatever worms are in there and whatever worms are hatch. So if the bin is stored in a warm area, because it's just cardboard, it will dry out much quicker than probably my bin here, which is kept outside all the time. So really that's all it is, just a matter of every 3 or 4 days just having a look at the bin, turning it over, getting plenty of air through, because the cardboard will stick together, so you need to keep breaking it up. Any big lumps I find I just tear up into smaller lumps. That'll get plenty of air through into the bin, and it should continue to work quite well. Now, we're almost at the end. This is the general purpose compost bin. What you saw there at the very start of this clip was the compost area. This is the bin that I kick-started using cardboard. I did a very short video on it, and the only thing I added was cardboard. And it brought the temperature right up into the high 30s and 40s. There were a few worms made their way in here, but this bin has everything that shouldn't be in a worm bin. So it has orange peel, it has lemon rind, it has leeks, it has onion peel, it has everything, because I don't bother separating what goes in here. This is, like I said, it's the general compost pile. Now take a look at this. In the 2 months that I've been away, this bin is absolutely crawling with worms. Absolutely crawling with worms. Doesn't matter where I put my hand, and there's a very strong orangey smell from it, actually. So, according to everything you'll read and hear and see, there should be very few, if no worms in this bin. I didn't set it up as a worm bin. That's a little bit of tape that's left after the worms have consumed the cardboard that it was attached to. But just look, it's heaving with worms, and I strongly suspect that the worms that have bailed out or disappeared from the blue recycling worm bins have actually made their way in here. So for all of you who've been worried about the worms and where they've gone and what's happening in the bin, and oh no, did they die off? I actually don't think they did. I think they were used to a constant, steady food supply, and when that food supply appeared to be drying up, a percentage of the worms said, sod this, we're off, and they made their way into this bin, which would have been the nearest to hand. I'm going down 1 fork depth, and you can see it's absolutely heaving with worms. So don't fret, my friends. I don't think anything bad happened to worms from the blue recycling worm bins. I think this is where they went. That's your update for week 45. I'll see you at the end of this week for week 46. Thanks for watching.